Israel and the United States stand at a turning point, trying to project strength while the ground beneath them is shifting, and global markets tremble at the possibility of a full-blown economic shock. Today on Geo Vanguard, I'm your host, Michael Andrews, and together we're going to unpack how the assassination of key Iranian leaders has pushed the Middle East closer to the edge, why Washington and Tel Aviv look more desperate by the day, and how all of this could spiral into a worldwide economic crisis that touches everything from fuel prices to food on your kitchen table. Take a deep breath, settle in, and imagine this as if you're watching events unfold in real time. Sirens wail in distant cities, oil tankers sit motionless in choke points, and in boardrooms around the world, people stare at charts that are starting to look frightening. That's where we are right now, so let's begin. First, picture the immediate fallout in Iran. Overnight, the country loses not just one symbolic figure, but several pillars of its leadership structure. Supreme power, religious authority, and military command are all suddenly shaken. The message from those who carried out these assassinations is clear. We can reach your most protected leaders. Nowhere is safe. On paper, that looks like a decisive strategic victory for Israel and the United States. But if you zoom out, you see something very different taking shape. Crowds pour into the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad. They are angry, grieving, and united not around a government program or a specific policy, but around one raw emotion: revenge. You can hear the chants echoing through the night, not just against foreign powers, but against any idea of compromise. The moderates, the pragmatists, the negotiators, these are now the weakest voices in the room. The space for diplomacy shrinks, almost hour by hour, and the people who warned for years that targeting leadership would radicalize the system are suddenly proven right. Inside Iran's security establishment, something else is happening. The old guard, those who had memories of past wars and cautious restraint, are replaced or overshadowed by figures who believe only in escalation. Their logic is simple. They killed our leaders. If we show weakness now, we invite our own destruction. With that mindset, every attack becomes easier to justify, every risk easier to take, and every red line more tempting to cross. Now shift your camera to Washington. In official speeches, the American president presents this as a triumph of intelligence and precision. He speaks proudly about technology, tracking, and surgical strikes. He tells his supporters that this is a gift to the people of Iran, a chance to take back their country. But behind the podium, the mood is not confident. Senior security officials worry about blowback. Military planners are suddenly staring at maps full of vulnerable bases and supply lines across the entire region, places that Iran and its allies can now target. One of the most striking developments is inside the U.S. national security bureaucracy itself. A senior counterterrorism official resigns, not quietly, but with a message. He suggests that this war was not driven by an imminent threat to the United States, but by political pressure and lobbying from powerful groups aligned with Israel. He points out that there was no clear, immediate danger to American soil that justified such a dramatic escalation. For years, analysts, journalists, and independent experts had argued that Washington was being pulled into confrontation by external pressure. Now, someone from inside the system is effectively confirming that suspicion. This resignation sends shockwaves through Washington's political circles. It raises uncomfortable questions. Who is really driving U.S. policy in the Middle East? Is this truly about American security, or about aligning U.S. power with the strategic ambitions of another state? And if there was no imminent threat, then what exactly have American soldiers and taxpayers been asked to pay for? Across the Atlantic, in Europe, the reaction is more cautious and restrained. Governments that once instinctively supported U.S. operations in the region are now stepping back. Key European allies quietly make it clear that they do not intend to be dragged into a war that risks closing vital shipping routes and detonating energy prices. When Washington calls for NATO involvement, the response is lukewarm at best. Leaders in Europe know that if this conflict cuts off the flow of oil and gas, their economies and their political stability are on the line. Let's move from the political to the strategic battlefield. A critical factor in this crisis lies in geography. The narrow waterways and choke points that keep the global energy and food system functioning. Two names matter more than almost any others: the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb corridor. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important energy arteries on the planet. A huge share of the world's oil and significant amounts of liquefied natural gas pass through this narrow passage every single day. Iran knows this, and for decades its leaders have treated the strait as their ultimate leverage. Now, with their leadership assassinated and their territory under attack, that leverage looks more like a weapon they are increasingly willing to use. Iran announces that the strait is open for its friends, but closed for its enemies. Tankers linked to rival states or to the United States and its closest allies suddenly find their routes contested, their passage threatened. Insurance markets panic. Shipping companies start rerouting vessels or suspending journeys altogether. A few incidents, a drone strike on a tanker here, a mysterious explosion there, are enough to send energy traders into a frenzy. Now imagine another domino falling. The Bab el-Mandeb corridor at the southern end of the Red Sea. This route connects Asia, Europe, and the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Already, armed groups in the region have previously targeted shipping there, especially those connected to Israel. If Iran and its regional partners decide to fully weaponize this corridor, the consequences could be staggering. Not only does it carry a significant portion of the world's oil trade, it also channels container ships carrying everything from electronics to grain. Put these two choke points together, and you begin to see the nightmare scenario that keeps economists awake at night. Oil prices spike sharply as traders price in the risk of sustained disruption. Gas supplies to key markets are threatened. Fertilizer shipments, many of which rely on the same energy routes, are delayed or cut. In some regions, especially poorer countries that depend on imported food and fertilizer, the chain reaction could be brutal. Higher costs for farmers, lower crop yields, and millions of people pushed toward acute hunger. International agencies start issuing warnings. They estimate that if these shipping routes remain unstable or partially blocked, tens of millions of people could face severe food insecurity. For many, that means not just higher prices, but actual shortages. This isn't a theoretical model. We've already seen how disruptions in one region can ripple through the entire global food system. When a war or blockade cuts off fertilizer or grain shipments, the effects show up months later on the plates of ordinary families thousands of kilometers away. Back in the Gulf, the so-called miracle economies look increasingly fragile. The glossy images of skyscrapers, luxury shopping malls, and futuristic ports conceal a simple reality. These states depend heavily on two things: energy exports and imported food. If oil exports falter and food supplies are disrupted, their foundations start to crack. Take a small, trade-heavy Gulf state. Its entire model is built on being a hub, a place where money flows in, expatriates arrive to work, and goods pass through its ports. If attacks on tankers force ships to avoid its waters, if energy infrastructure is targeted, and if airlines face fuel shortages or rising insurance costs, that model begins to fail. The city that once sold itself as a financial and tourism paradise risks becoming a high-risk zone that investors and visitors are hesitant to enter. Another neighboring state, heavily dependent on gas exports, faces a different but related crisis. Gas revenues make up the bulk of its national income. If production is halted or exports are disrupted, whether by attacks, blockades, or political pressure, its budget is hammered. Government spending slows, infrastructure projects stall, foreign workers, sensing instability, begin to leave. What looked like a guaranteed stream of wealth suddenly appears vulnerable to events far beyond the control of local policymakers. Meanwhile, smaller Gulf monarchies connected by narrow causeways or reliant on nearby powers for food and fuel find themselves in an extremely precarious position. If a key bridge or shipping route is attacked, they can quickly become isolated. In some of these states, the population and the ruling elite are divided along sectarian lines, adding another layer of risk. When people are hungry and governments look weak, old grievances can resurface quickly. All of this is happening while missiles and drones continue to fly across the region. Iran claims to have hit dozens, even hundreds, of military and security targets deep inside Israel. Images and videos start circulating of impacts in major cities, particularly on infrastructure linked to defense, cyber operations, and weapons manufacturing. Even if some of these claims are exaggerated, enough damage is visible to make one thing clear: Israel's aura of complete invulnerability has been badly shaken. For many years, Israel relied on its advanced air defense systems to reassure its citizens and deter its adversaries. The promise was that most threats would be intercepted before they could reach population centers. But facing large volleys of missiles and drones, some more advanced and faster than seen before, the system begins to show its limits. The sheer volume of incoming fire overwhelms interception capacity. Some missiles get through. Military bases, industrial facilities, and even underground bunkers are struck. Psychologically, this is devastating. In some Iranian cities, life goes on, strained but functioning. Shops open, people go to work, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the threat. In Israel, however, many citizens find themselves living in bomb shelters for days on end. Sirens blare repeatedly until, in some areas, the early warning systems themselves are degraded by attacks on radar and communication infrastructure. The sense of constant vulnerability builds. People emerge from shelters to see streets damaged, buildings shattered, and familiar neighborhoods transformed. Inside Israel's leadership circle, the pressure is immense. The government promised decisive victories and deterrence. Instead, they face a prolonged conflict, damaged infrastructure, shaken public confidence, and mounting international criticism. Questions swirl about whether their strategy of targeted assassinations and heavy strikes has actually made the country safer, or whether it has triggered a war that Israel cannot fully control. In parallel, the United States faces a brutal reassessment of its own military doctrine. High-precision weapons that were meant to demonstrate overwhelming superiority are being expended at a rate that alarms planners. Stocks of long-range cruise missiles and advanced munitions are drawn down rapidly in the early days of the conflict. Rebuilding those stockpiles will take years, not months. Production lines are limited, budgets are finite, and other global commitments, from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, still demand attention. Air defense systems that were marketed as game changers reveal steep costs and operational limits when sustained barrages are involved. It becomes clear that no system can provide a perfect shield when confronted with determined adversaries using hypersonic missiles, swarm drones, and coordinated attacks on radar and command centers. The image of the United States as an all-seeing, all-controlling military power takes a hit. This is where desperation begins to show. When a superpower invests decades in projecting dominance and then finds its hardware failing to deliver clear victory, options narrow. That's when talk of more extreme measures, a broader regional escalation, cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure, or in the worst case, the theoretical use of weapons of mass destruction, enters the strategic conversation. Even if leadership never intends to cross those red lines, the fact that analysts and commentators start discussing them openly is a sign of how shaken the system has become. Yet this is not just a military story, it's an economic one, and it touches everyone watching this video. As oil prices climb, central banks in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas face a familiar and unwelcome dilemma. Higher energy costs feed into inflation. Transport becomes more expensive. The price of everything from manufactured goods to food increases. For countries already struggling with debt, weak currencies, or slow growth after years of instability, this new shock can be devastating. Investors, sensing increased risk, start pulling money out of emerging markets. Capital flows back into perceived safe havens, leaving vulnerable economies facing currency crises. Governments that subsidize fuel and food find their budgets stretched to the breaking point. If they cut subsidies, protests may follow. If they keep them, they risk financial collapse. On top of that, the instability in the Middle East raises doubts about long-term energy investment. Companies reconsider projects that depend on calm sea lanes and predictable political environments. Some accelerate efforts to diversify into renewables or alternative suppliers, but those transitions take time. In the short term, the world is still heavily dependent on oil and gas that pass through dangerous waters and contested territories. At the same time, global trade routes are thrown into disarray. If the Red Sea route becomes too risky, ships must take longer detours around Africa, adding weeks to delivery times and driving up costs. Insurance premiums for vessels operating anywhere near conflict zones soar. Ports begin to feel the impact. Fewer ships, fewer containers, fewer jobs. The world's logistics network, already strained from previous crises, bends under the pressure. All of this filters down to the everyday level in quiet but painful ways. A family in Europe notices that their energy bill has jumped again. A small business in Africa struggles because spare parts arrive late and cost more. A household in Asia sees the price of cooking oil, bread, and vegetables climb week after week. Eventually, people connect the dots. A missile strike in a distant country, a blockade in a narrow strait, and the realities of their own lives are suddenly intertwined. As this reality sinks in, a strange and troubling phenomenon appears in the digital world. Online prediction markets and betting platforms begin to treat war like a sporting event. People place bets on whether a missile will hit a particular target, on whether a leader will survive, on whether a certain city will be struck. In some corners of the internet, explosions become just another data point, another line on a chart to gamble on. This is more than just bad taste. It reflects a deeper moral numbness, a world in which modern technology has turned real human suffering into an abstract entertainment product. While families hide in basements and children wake up to the sound of blasts, someone somewhere is watching a screen and asking, "Will this help my position go up or down?" At the same time, there is growing debate in democratic societies about the ethics of assassination as a tool of foreign policy. If advanced technology allows a state to locate and kill foreign leaders with high precision, does that mean it should do so? What precedent does this set? If one government claims the right to eliminate another country's leadership in the name of security, what stops others from adopting the same logic? Legal scholars, human rights groups, and former officials raise alarms. They argue that normalizing targeted killings of political and religious leaders risks eroding the foundations of international law. It encourages tit-for-tat responses, where every assassination invites another. And once that door is open, it becomes much harder to close. In the middle of this charged debate, protesters take to the streets in multiple capitals. Some march against the war, some against specific governments, others against the broader system that, in their view, treats certain lives as expendable. They carry signs, light candles, and share images of destruction from Gaza, Tel Aviv, Tehran, and beyond. They demand accountability, not just from one side, but from all those who have escalated the conflict. Yet, amid all this chaos, one constant theme emerges. The illusion of control is fading. Israel thought it could decapitate Iran's leadership and force the regime into submission. The United States believed that high-tech strikes and pressure would produce a more manageable Middle East. Instead, both now confront a region on fire, allies who are reluctant to follow their lead, and a global economy dangerously exposed to events they cannot tightly manage. The deeper irony is that the very actions justified as protecting stability are now threatening to generate the opposite: instability on a scale that could reshape the geopolitical and economic landscape for years. So where does this leave the world? We stand in a moment where a few narrow waterways, a handful of strategic assassinations, and a series of miscalculations by powerful states have combined to produce a level of risk that no one can fully predict. It's a moment when the choices of leaders in Washington, Tel Aviv, Tehran, and major capitals around the world will determine not just who wins or loses a war, but whether millions of people will be able to afford food, fuel, and basic security. For Israel and the United States, the line between strength and desperation is becoming blurred. Publicly, they speak the language of resolve and victory. Privately, they face the reality of stretched military resources, shaken alliances, and a global audience that is increasingly skeptical of their narratives. Every new strike, every new threat, carries the risk of further escalation. But stepping back requires a level of political courage and honesty that is often in short supply. For Iran, the loss of its top leaders is both a wound and a rallying cry. The temptation to respond forcefully is immense. Yet the more it escalates, the more it risks inviting even more devastating responses. For the rest of the region, the challenge is to survive the storm, to avoid being drawn too deeply into a conflict that could destroy their own economies and societies. And for ordinary people, whether in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, the task is to navigate a world in which distant decisions have immediate consequences. A war they did not choose could reshape their financial security, their job prospects, and their access to basic necessities. As we close, I want you to imagine the voiceover of this video not as a distant, robotic narration, but as a conversation we're having in real time. The pauses, the shifts in tone, the moments of disbelief or concern, Those are human reactions to a situation that affects all of us. You're listening to Geo Vanguard. I'm Michael Andrews. If you found this breakdown helpful, stay with us. In upcoming episodes, we'll dig deeper into how global markets are pricing in this new reality, how alternative trade routes and energy strategies are being considered, and whether there is any realistic path back from the brink. Until then, stay informed, stay critical, and remember, when leaders gamble with war, it's the rest of the world that pays the price.